This lesson is going to cover two Greek historians, Herodotus and Thucydides. Herodotus has been called the father of history, and while I'm not 100% sure that I agree with that designation, that is definitely the reputation that he has. Herodotus was a Greek, and he was born on the island city-state of Halicarnassus, which was actually near the Turkish coast. Herodotus was born approximately around 480 BC and died around 430 BC. So he's only about 50, maybe 60 years old when he passed away. Herodotus wrote a very thick and very long history of the major event that occurred just before his lifetime, and that was the Persian Wars that we will be talking about in some future lessons. Herodotus' desire was to understand and communicate why the Persian Wars had taken place and give a detailed background on the events that had taken place. And Herodotus did this by covering in very deep detail the people who had attacked Greece. In fact, he wrote significantly more about the people who would attack the Medes and the Persians and those who would fight with them than he did for the majority of the events in his book that concerned Greece. So that is why he is called the father of history, but his history is really what we would now call today an ethnography, basically an ethnic geography, looking at the way that people lived, how they ate, how they prepared for war. And it is because of his efforts that we largely know about these people. Apart from him, we have very little to go on, even from these people themselves. Now, Herodotus' history is very long and very thick, as I said, and his objective was very clear, and that makes him very unique in many different annals. And it's also a unique look because Herodotus does not reference any of the gods. He doesn't represent or reference divine directions. He keeps it very, what we would call secular, non-religious. And so that is also something very unique about him. Now there was another historian, and his name was Thucydides. And Thucydides wrote after Herodotus passed away, because Herodotus passed away just at or just into a time period which we call the Peloponnesian War, which lasted from 431 BC to 404 BC. And Thucydides was really the first, what I would call, war historian, military historian. He wrote about the Peloponnesian War in super detail. Again, most of the histories or information that we have about wars and individual battles prior to Thucydides were very short inscriptions, mostly lasting a page and a half, or very short paragraph summaries. And so to have as extensive an account as Thucydides of not just a battle, but of an entire war, makes it a very unique opportunity to understand the ancient world. Now, Thucydides had the unique position of writing about the war because he had been a general. He had fought in the war and had fought for the Athenians. And Thucydides was one of the few Athenian generals to fail and to escape with his life. He was exiled, and I can't remember where he was exiled to, but again, mostly if you were an Athenian general during the Peloponnesian War and you failed, you would be executed for your failure. So he was definitely one of the lucky ones. And as I said, he went and he wrote about his experiences. He wrote about what was happening up until probably just before his death. It cuts off before the end of the actual war, and so we do believe that he intended to write more, but was probably indisposed. He probably fell ill and then died without completing his narrative. Now again, Thucydides represents a very unique departure from the prior histories, and he definitely followed very much in the footsteps of Herodotus, or wrote very similarly to him, because he wrote without reference to the gods, did not represent them as being involved in the affairs. He kept it very strictly political and military. And Thucydides also represented both sides of the conflict. He did this by recording speeches. Now, some of these speeches, we're not sure if he looked at records that had existed but don't exist today, or if he made them up. I generally fall more towards the having read speeches that were written down, or he had actually gone and done history work by interviewing eyewitnesses and people who had been there and got the substance of the speech and then wrote it out. And what the speeches do is they help us understand. They kind of distill in very compact form the thinking, the motivations, and the desires of the people who were involved in this conflict. So again, we have an excellent time capsule of thinking and how not only political processes went in Greece during this time, but also how people thought about war, and about conflicts, and about all this other stuff. So it's a very unique history. And history is a very tricky discipline, and the Greeks really managed to hone it to a degree that nobody else had in other places. Again, most histories prior to this were very much manipulated and written for a king or for a queen, and so would often reflect that specific royal ideology, and would also be heavily infused with the gods or God or a combination of those. Does that make those histories any less authoritative? No. However, those histories have to be approached with a little bit more caution and a little bit more interpretational maneuvering and tight-roping, as we say. Whereas with Herodotus and with Thucydides, we're able to see histories that present us with really a much more broad, generic view, and stories that were transmitted by other cultures. Now again, some people have questioned whether those stories that Herodotus wrote were fully authentic and whether everything was factual. Surprisingly enough, the archaeological evidence tends to support Herodotus as well as Thucydides, much more than in any way disproving them. So take that for what it's worth. So ancient historians definitely knew what they were doing. They took time, they took a lot of pains to research their material, research their subject, and gain quite a bit of information. In a future lesson, we will talk about two other historians, one named Xenophon and one named Polybius, who also helped contribute to the forward advancement of the historical discipline. Just real quick, allow me to say, we get the word history from histor. And the histor was a legal representative, much like a lawyer, who would search, would look through the documentation, and help prove a client's case. So these men really acted within that vein of acting very much like a lawyer and an investigative reporter. Thank you.